I never thought the person I trusted most would become the reason I had to question everything I believed about my own marriage. My name is Michael Anderson, and for nearly 2 decades, I believed I had built a life based on honesty, partnership, and trust. I was 47 years old, living in Texas, and I had spent most of my adult life creating stability for my family. I owned a small logistics company that I built from the ground up, starting with one vehicle, a few clients, and a determination to create something my family could be proud of. Every long day, every difficult decision, and every sacrifice was made with one goal in mind: building a secure future. For years, I believed my wife Laura was my greatest partner in that journey. We had been married long enough to know each other's habits, strengths, and weaknesses. Like any couple, we had disagreements. We had moments when work became stressful, when responsibilities felt overwhelming, and when life seemed to move faster than we could handle. But I always believed we had something strong enough to overcome those challenges. Laura was intelligent, independent, and someone I respected. She had her own opinions about life, money, and the future, and I appreciated that about her. I never wanted a relationship where one person controlled everything. I believed marriage was about 2 people making decisions together while supporting each other's dreams. Our finances represented more than numbers on a screen. They represented years of effort, planning, and conversations about the future we wanted to create. We talked about retirement, improving our home, traveling more, and enjoying the life we worked so hard to build. I trusted that when it came to important decisions, Laura and I were always on the same page. That belief started to change on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee when my phone showed a notification from our bank. At first, I barely paid attention. Financial alerts were normal. Bills were paid, expenses happened, and money moved through our accounts every day. But something about this notification made me stop. It was not just the transaction itself. It was the feeling that something had happened without a conversation between us. I opened the information again, trying to understand what I was seeing. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. After all, this was Laura. The woman I had shared years of memories with. The person who knew my struggles, my goals, and the sacrifices behind everything we built. I did not want to assume the worst. I did not want to turn one unexpected moment into a conclusion about my entire marriage. But I also knew that ignoring questions would not make them disappear. Over the next several days, I started paying closer attention. I looked back at conversations we had, decisions we made, and small moments I might have overlooked. I began to wonder if this was just a misunderstanding or if there was something bigger happening beneath the surface. What I discovered next would change the way I looked at trust, partnership, and the future I thought we were building together. For several days after that notification appeared on my phone, I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking everything. I told myself that one unexpected financial activity did not mean my marriage was falling apart. After 20 years with Laura, I knew better than to judge an entire relationship based on one moment. I had learned that every situation had details that were not always visible at first. So instead of reacting emotionally, I decided to slow down and understand what was really happening. That was how I had always handled problems in my business. When a shipment was delayed or a customer had a concern, I did not make decisions based on frustration. I gathered information, looked at the facts, and searched for the real cause. I decided my marriage deserved that same level of patience. I began reviewing our financial activity more carefully. Not because I wanted to find a reason to blame Laura, but because I needed to understand why I felt disconnected from decisions that affected both of us. As I looked through the information, I started noticing things that made me uncomfortable. They were not dramatic moments that immediately revealed everything. They were small details that, when placed together, created a different picture. There were financial choices I did not remember discussing. There were conversations about future plans where I felt like I was hearing only part of the story. Each individual moment seemed easy to explain, but together they created a feeling I could not ignore. The hardest part was accepting that I had missed the signs. Looking back, I realized that Laura and I had slowly changed the way we communicated. Years earlier, we talked about almost everything. We discussed our goals, our concerns, and our plans. But as life became busier, we started handling more things individually. My company demanded more of my attention. Laura had her own responsibilities. We were both working hard, but somewhere along the way, we stopped checking in with each other the way we used to. I started wondering if the distance between us had been growing without either of us noticing. I did not want to believe Laura was intentionally hiding something from me. She was still the person I shared my life with. She was the person who supported me during difficult years when I was trying to grow my business. She knew the pressure I carried and the sacrifices I made. That history mattered to me. But trust is complicated. Sometimes the hardest questions are not about what someone did. They are about why they felt they could not talk to you first. I spent several nights thinking about what I should do next. Part of me wanted to immediately ask Laura for answers. Another part of me knew that an emotional conversation without understanding the situation could create more confusion. I wanted the truth, but I wanted it through a calm and honest discussion. I did not want accusations. I did not want a fight. I wanted to know whether we were facing a misunderstanding or whether there was a deeper problem in our marriage. Before I talked to Laura, I decided I needed to understand my own feelings first. I asked myself what bothered me the most. Was it the financial concern itself? Or was it the realization that my wife and I might not have been communicating the way I thought we were? The answer became clearer every day. The money was only the surface. The real issue was trust. And I knew that whatever happened next would require a conversation neither of us could avoid. The conversation with Laura was something I knew I could not avoid forever. After spending days trying to understand what was happening, I realized that staying silent would only create more distance between us. I did not want to approach her with assumptions or anger. I wanted to approach her with honesty because, despite everything I had discovered, I still cared about the life we had built together. One evening after dinner, we sat in the living room of our Texas home. The room was quiet, and for a moment, I remembered all the years we had spent there. The holidays, the celebrations, the simple evenings after long work days. That room represented so many memories, which made the conversation even harder. I looked at Laura and told her that I needed to talk about something important. I explained that I had noticed some financial activity that concerned me and that I wanted to understand what was happening. I made it clear that I was not there to accuse her. I wanted to hear her side of the story. Laura was quiet for a moment before she responded. She admitted that she had been making financial decisions without fully discussing them with me. Hearing her say that was difficult, not because I wanted to believe the worst about her, but because it confirmed that my concerns were real. She explained that she had been thinking about her own future and wanted to create a stronger sense of security for herself. From her perspective, she believed she was being responsible. She felt that having more control over certain financial matters would give her confidence about what came next in life. Listening to her explanation helped me understand something important. Laura did not see the situation the same way I did. She was not looking at it as a problem with trust. She was looking at it as a way to protect herself. But I explained that protection without communication could damage the very relationship we were trying to protect. I told her that marriage was not about one person making decisions alone. It was about two people working together, especially when those decisions affected both of our futures. The conversation became less about specific financial choices and more about the foundation of our relationship. We talked about how we had both become so focused on our own responsibilities that we stopped having important conversations. I admitted that I had spent years assuming Laura understood my perspective without always taking the time to ask about hers. She admitted that she should have been more open instead of handling important matters independently. That moment was difficult, but it was also the first time in a long time that we were truly honest with each other. However, honesty also meant accepting that trust had been affected. I could understand Laura's reasons, but I could not ignore how her choices made me feel. I needed to think carefully about what should happen next. I had built my company by making thoughtful decisions, and now I needed to bring that same responsibility into my personal life. I did not want revenge. I did not want to punish Laura. I wanted to make sure that my future was protected while leaving room for a healthier conversation about our marriage. That night, after we finished talking, I sat alone for a while and thought about everything we had shared. I realized that sometimes the biggest challenges in life do not come from strangers. They come from situations that force us to look more closely at the people and relationships we value most. And I knew the next decision I made would shape everything that came after. After the conversation with Laura, I realized that understanding the truth was only the first step. Knowing why she made those choices helped me see the situation from a different perspective, but it did not erase the responsibility I felt to protect my own future. I spent the next few days thinking carefully about what I should do. I did not want to make a decision based on disappointment or emotion. I wanted to make a decision based on preparation and clarity. That was how I had always handled my business. When challenges appeared, I did not ignore them and hope they disappeared. I studied the situation, considered the possible outcomes, and made responsible choices. I knew my personal life deserved the same level of attention. I contacted a financial advisor I trusted, a man named Robert Mitchell, who had helped me understand business planning over the years. When we met, I explained the situation honestly. I told him about the financial concerns, the conversation with Laura, and the uncertainty I was feeling. Robert listened carefully and reminded me of something important. He said that financial issues in a marriage are rarely only about money. They are usually connected to trust, communication, and expectations. Hearing that helped me understand why this situation affected me so deeply. The numbers were only part of the problem. The bigger issue was feeling like I was no longer included in decisions that affected both of our lives. Robert did not tell me what choice to make. Instead, he encouraged me to think about what boundaries I needed to feel secure and respected. He reminded me that protecting myself was not the same as attacking Laura. It was about creating a healthier situation where important decisions could not happen without open communication. After that conversation, I started reviewing our financial structure more carefully. I organized documents, looked at our responsibilities, and made sure I understood exactly where we stood. I approached everything calmly because I did not want to create unnecessary conflict. My goal was not to make Laura feel powerless. My goal was to make sure that both of us understood that major decisions required transparency. Eventually, I decided to take practical steps to protect my financial stability. I followed the proper procedures with our financial institutions and adjusted how certain account activities were handled. These were not actions taken out of anger. They were actions taken because I needed a clear boundary after realizing that our communication had broken down. When Laura learned about the changes, she was surprised. She asked why I had taken those steps without waiting longer. I told her that I had not done it to hurt her. I explained that I still cared about our marriage and respected the years we had shared. But I also needed her to understand that trust works both ways. If we wanted to rebuild our relationship, we needed honesty from both sides. That conversation was difficult because Laura felt that my decision showed a lack of trust in her. I explained that trust was exactly why the situation mattered so much. If I did not value our relationship, I would not have cared enough to have these conversations. I would have simply walked away emotionally. Instead, I was trying to create a foundation where both of us could feel respected. For the first time since everything started, I felt that I was no longer reacting to the situation. I was making thoughtful decisions about my future. I did not know what would happen next with Laura and me, but I knew that avoiding the problem was no longer an option. Sometimes protecting what matters most requires having difficult conversations and making choices that are not easy. and I was finally ready to face whatever came next. After I made those changes, I expected things between Laura and me to become easier because at least we were finally acknowledging the problem. But I quickly learned that solving a trust issue is not as simple as making one decision or having one serious conversation. The hardest part was accepting that the way we saw the situation was completely different. I believed I was protecting the stability we had built together. Laura believed she was protecting herself. Both of us were looking at the same situation through different experiences and emotions. A few days after the changes were made, Laura and I sat down again to talk. This time, the conversation felt different. There was still tension, but there was also a willingness to listen. I told her that I wanted her to understand my perspective. I explained that what hurt me most was not the financial concern itself. It was the feeling that a decision affecting both of us had been made without my involvement. After 20 years of marriage, I thought we had created a partnership where important choices were shared. Laura listened, and then she explained something I had not fully considered. She told me that over the years, she had started feeling uncertain about the future. She saw me working long hours, managing my company, and carrying many responsibilities. She respected my dedication, but she also worried about what would happen if circumstances changed. In her mind, creating more personal security was a way to feel prepared. Hearing that did not erase the way I felt, but it helped me understand that her actions came from her own fears and concerns. For the first time, I realized that we had both been protecting ourselves in different ways. I protected myself by working harder, planning carefully, and creating financial stability. Laura protected herself by trying to create more independence. The problem was not that either of us wanted security. The problem was that we stopped talking about what security meant to each of us. That realization changed the way I viewed the entire situation. I had entered the conversation expecting to find answers about money, but I discovered a much deeper issue in our marriage. We had allowed assumptions to replace communication. We had both been carrying thoughts and worries that we never fully shared. Still, understanding Laura did not mean I could ignore what happened. I told her that rebuilding trust would require more than explanations. It would require consistent actions over time. I needed to feel that we were making decisions together again. Laura agreed that things needed to change. She admitted that she should have included me earlier instead of believing she could handle everything on her own. That moment was important because it was the first time we both accepted responsibility instead of focusing only on who was right or wrong. Looking back, that conversation became the turning point. The situation that started as a financial concern revealed the real issue we had been avoiding for years. We had stopped communicating openly. We had stopped asking questions. We had stopped making sure we understood each other's feelings. I still did not know exactly what the future of our marriage would look like, but I knew something had changed. I was no longer trying to prove that I was right. I was trying to understand what needed to happen for both of us to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally talking about the real problem. After everything that happened, I started realizing that the biggest challenge was not fixing a financial situation. It was understanding how two people who loved each other could slowly become disconnected without noticing. For years, Laura and I believed we were working toward the same future, but we had been walking through life with different concerns, different expectations, and different ways of handling uncertainty. That realization was difficult, but it was also important because it gave us a chance to change something that had been quietly affecting our marriage for a long time. In the weeks that followed, Laura and I began having more honest conversations than we had in years. We talked about our goals, our fears, and the things we had both kept to ourselves. I learned that Laura had been carrying worries she never shared with me. She learned that my silence about my own stress did not mean I was unaffected by the pressure I carried every day. We both discovered that we had been making assumptions instead of asking questions. I continued focusing on my business, but I also made a conscious effort to create more space for conversations at home. I realized that being responsible for providing stability did not mean I could ignore the emotional side of my relationship. A strong marriage was not built only through hard work and financial planning. It was built through communication, understanding, and the willingness to be honest even when the truth was uncomfortable. Laura also began changing the way she approached important decisions. Instead of handling concerns on her own, she started bringing them to me. That did not happen overnight. Trust is not rebuilt through one conversation or one promise. It is rebuilt through repeated actions that show respect and commitment. There were still difficult moments. There were times when old feelings returned and we had to remind ourselves why we were trying to move forward. But those moments became opportunities to practice better communication instead of returning to old habits. Looking back, I realized that the situation changed me in ways I never expected. Before everything happened, I thought protecting my family meant working harder, earning more, and planning for the future. Those things were important, but I learned that protection also meant paying attention to the relationship itself. It meant knowing what my partner was thinking, understanding what she was feeling, and making sure neither of us felt alone in decisions that affected both of us. I also learned that trust is not something people simply receive because they are married. Trust is something two people continue building through every conversation and every choice. When that trust is damaged, it requires patience, humility, and effort from both sides. I did not see myself as someone who had won a battle, because that was never what I wanted. I wanted a marriage where both people felt respected and heard. The experience taught me that sometimes the hardest moments reveal the conversations we have been avoiding for too long. They force us to look beyond the surface and understand what truly needs attention. Today, I look at that difficult chapter differently. It was not only a moment of uncertainty. It was a lesson about communication, boundaries, and the responsibility we have to protect the relationships that matter most. And while the future is always something we continue building, I know that honesty will always be the foundation we need. After the changes Laura and I made, our relationship entered a stage I never expected. The problem that once felt like it could separate us became something that forced us to look at ourselves more honestly. But rebuilding trust was not about pretending nothing happened. It was about understanding that a strong relationship requires both people to keep choosing each other, especially after difficult moments. For a while, I focused on observing the small things. I noticed how our conversations became more open. I noticed how Laura started sharing her thoughts before making decisions, even when she was unsure how I would respond. Those moments may have seemed simple from the outside, but to me, they represented something important. They showed that rebuilding trust was happening through everyday actions, not just promises. I also had to look at my own behavior. For years, I had been proud of being the person who solved problems. In my business, that mindset helped me succeed. When something went wrong, I found a solution. When there was pressure, I worked harder. But marriage was different. I learned that not every problem could be solved by one person taking control. Sometimes the answer came from slowing down and listening. I realized there were moments when Laura needed my attention more than my solutions. She did not always need me to fix something. Sometimes she simply needed me to understand what she was feeling. That lesson changed the way I approached our relationship. We started creating new habits. We talked about finances regularly instead of only discussing them when there was a problem. We planned our goals together and made sure both of us understood the decisions we were making. These conversations were not always comfortable, but they became necessary. The silence that once created distance slowly became replaced with honesty. During this time, I also began thinking about boundaries in a different way. Before, I thought boundaries were about keeping people away. I learned that healthy boundaries were actually about creating respect and clarity. They allowed both people in a relationship to feel valued. They created a space where trust could grow because expectations were understood. Laura and I were not trying to return to exactly who we were before. That version of our marriage had allowed communication to slowly disappear. Instead, we were trying to build something better, something based on awareness and intentional choices. I knew there would always be challenges ahead. Every marriage has moments of uncertainty. Every person changes over time. The difference is whether two people are willing to face those changes together. Looking back, I realized that the most valuable thing I gained from that difficult period was not a better understanding of finances. It was a better understanding of people. I learned that even someone you love deeply can have fears they never express. I learned that assumptions can create distance faster than disagreements. Most importantly, I learned that trust is not protected by avoiding difficult conversations. It is protected by having them. Laura and I were still working through our journey, but for the first time in a long time, we felt like we were moving in the same direction again. The experience changed how I viewed marriage, responsibility, and partnership. I no longer believed that a strong relationship meant never facing problems. I believed it meant having the courage to face them together. As time passed, I started to understand that the hardest part of any difficult chapter is not the moment when everything changes. The hardest part is what comes afterward. It is the quiet period when you have to decide what kind of person you want to become after experiencing disappointment, uncertainty, and change. For me, that period became a time of reflection. I spent many mornings before work thinking about what I had learned and what I wanted my future to look like. I realized that I could not control every decision another person made, but I could control how I responded and what values I wanted to carry forward. My focus slowly shifted from protecting myself from what had happened to building a healthier foundation for what came next. I continued running my logistics company in Texas, but I noticed a change in the way I approached my responsibilities. Before everything happened, I believed being a good husband meant carrying every burden quietly and solving every problem on my own. I thought strength meant always having the answer. Over time, I learned that real strength also meant being honest about uncertainty and allowing someone else to understand what I was experiencing. That lesson changed not only my marriage but also the way I viewed relationships in general. Laura and I continued having conversations about our future. Some were easy, and some required patience. We discussed our financial goals, our personal expectations, and the kind of life we wanted to create moving forward. The difference was that these conversations were no longer avoided. We no longer assumed the other person understood everything without being told. We made the effort to ask questions and listen carefully. That simple change made a bigger difference than I expected. I also learned that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It does not mean pretending a difficult moment never happened. Instead, forgiveness means understanding what happened, accepting the lessons from it, and deciding how to move forward without allowing the past to control every future moment. I still remembered the uncertainty I felt when I first discovered the problem, but I no longer carried that same weight. I had learned from the experience. I had grown through it. One of the biggest lessons I gained was about personal boundaries. For many years, I believed that putting family first meant always putting myself second. But I discovered that a healthy relationship does not require one person to disappear. Both people should feel respected, heard, and valued. Taking care of yourself is not a rejection of the person you love. Sometimes it is what allows you to become a better partner. Laura also shared that she had learned important lessons from the situation. She understood that independence and partnership were not opposites. She could have her own thoughts, goals, and concerns while still including me in decisions that affected both of us. We were both learning that a successful marriage required two people who could stand together while still respecting each other's individuality. Looking back, I realized that the experience changed my understanding of trust. I used to think trust was simply believing someone would never disappoint you. Now I see it differently. Trust is the willingness to communicate, to be transparent, and to continue showing respect even after challenges appear. The future was not about returning to the past. It was about creating something stronger with the lessons we had gained. And for the first time in a long time, I felt confident that we were building that future together. When I think back to everything that happened, I no longer see it as only a difficult moment in my marriage. I see it as a turning point that forced both Laura and me to understand what we truly valued. At the beginning, I believed the problem was about financial decisions. I thought the biggest challenge was figuring out what happened and protecting what we had built. But over time, I realized the real challenge was much deeper. It was about communication, trust, and whether two people who spent years together were still willing to truly understand each other. The experience taught me that a relationship can look strong from the outside while still having problems that need attention. Laura and I had a home, a history, and years of memories together, but we also had conversations we avoided and feelings we never fully expressed. We were both focused on being responsible in our own ways, yet we forgot that responsibility in a marriage means staying connected. Today, when I look back at those weeks, I remember the uncertainty I felt, but I also remember the lessons that came from it. I learned that protecting my future was important, but protecting the relationship required something different. It required patience, honesty, and the willingness to listen even when the conversation was uncomfortable. I learned that love is not proven by avoiding difficult moments. Love is proven by how two people handle those moments when they finally arrive. Laura and I continued working on our relationship one step at a time. We created better habits, communicated more clearly, and became more aware of each other's concerns. We did not suddenly become perfect. We were still two people with different personalities, different opinions, and different ways of seeing the world. But we became more intentional about making decisions together. That change was something I valued more than anything else. I also learned an important lesson about trust. Before this experience, I thought trust meant believing someone would always make the right choice. Now I understand that trust is built through openness and consistency. It is created when two people are willing to share their thoughts before problems become bigger. It grows when both people feel safe enough to be honest. The hardest moments in life often reveal things we would rather avoid seeing. They show us where we need to grow and where we need to change. For me, this experience revealed that I could not build a healthy future by focusing only on being the person who solved every problem. Sometimes the most important thing I could do was listen, communicate, and allow someone else to be part of the solution. Laura and I moved forward with a better understanding of what partnership meant. We stopped thinking about who was right and started focusing on what we needed to do better together. That shift changed everything. The past could not be rewritten, but it could teach us something valuable. It could remind us that every relationship requires effort from both people. Looking back now, I do not define that chapter by the uncertainty it created. I define it by the growth that followed. It showed me that even when trust is tested, there is still an opportunity to rebuild, learn, and create something stronger. The future is never guaranteed, but the choices we make every day determine the kind of future we create.